All right, now that we have that fixed, and there's no audio backlash going on, I'm Ari. I'm one of the co-founders of CraftQuest, and Maria is also the other co-founder of CraftQuest, and we put this together to get everyone in the realm of writing, so to speak, just talk about craft and things that normal people in the new writers probably don't know, and even it's just good to keep up on the trend and what's in and out. Today, our episode is all about making it up, which is pretty much starting with the beginning, the first line, first chapter.
Hi guys, I'm Maria, other co-founder of CraftQuest. We're excited to have you here today. You guys probably already know who me and Ari are, so we're going to introduce you to our special guests. Vivian, why don't you take a second and introduce yourself? Not that you need an introduction.
Yeah, of course. So a lot of people might know me from my YouTube channel, Vivian Reese. I give writing advice and writing tips. And I just released my debut novel 4 days ago. So I've been working on that for about 3 years. And I started my YouTube channel kind of around then, when I realized that teaching people really helps me learn, and I like teaching people. So that was basically my start.
Awesome. Megan, go for it.
All right. Hi, I'm Megan. I do not have a YouTube channel, but me and Justine, who will probably introduce herself next, and she's last in the group, we kind of run a critique service called the Inkwell Council, where we basically review chapters of your manuscript and give you advice, which are like the big important chapters when you send things out to people. But aside from that, I read way more than I probably should, and I like dogs, so there you go.
I'm Justine. I'm the second of the 3 Inkwell Council members. Ishmael could not be here today, but and he's our third. We critique manuscripts. We started this because we had we had 3 different ideas of writing, and of what we could find to help improve in writing. Megan's really our grammar girl. I'm sort of developmental, and Ishmael is the guy who asks all the questions about storylines. So we have a lot of fun with that because we're 3 writers who just want to help other writers, and that's pretty much what we do. And so on this, aside from that, I'm a great big geek. Books, comic books, whatever. I don't think you can ever be too much of a book geek, Megan. And, and other than that, I write young adult fantasy.
Awesome. Back to you, Ari.
Oh, goodness. So mine wasn't really a good introduction, was it?
Neither was mine. All good.
I was really nervous, and I didn't expect it to work this time. I'm Ari. I do have a YouTube channel. This is actually my second YouTube channel. My first one is, it was previously Ravenous Breeds, and then I changed it to Tangled in Tales because I like that better. I run a book blog. I am making a website for CraftQuest. I'm not making it. I'm just dragging and dropping and making it. So I do write. I am in the process of writing a young adult fantasy kind of book that has a Japanese folklore twist, and I pretty much, writing is my life. I do it as actual work, then I obsess over it as a hobby, so I'm pretty much drowning in it. And that's me. I like being social. I like getting stuff done, so I'm alright.
Awesome sauce. And I guess since, I pretty much just glanced over myself, I'll just go into it. So I'm also a blogger. I blog about writing craft. Also very nervous about being live, so apologies. And I'm currently writing my 5th manuscript that's been completed. I have about 10 others that have never been finished. And getting ready to query. We're on the last legs. So we are all writers, and we are here to help other writers. It's a good time. It's a very good time. So as Ari was saying, we're going to talk about beginnings today. So I guess let's start off with the most important question, because it's something I get a lot. So what is the process of deciding how you're going to approach a book? Are you a plotter or are you a pantser? And I'll give my pantser answer first, because I am 110% a pantser, although Ari is trying to get me to reform my ways, and I will absolutely be doing that for the next manuscript. I'm going to try anyway. So pantser, what is that? So basically I have no plan and I just start writing. I just have an idea and I just go for it, which leads to about 10,000 rounds of revisions and reworking and replotting, and it ends up being a whole mess of big plot holes and then a whole lot of polishing at the very end. So I don't know if I could regimentally plot out a book, because I don't know, there's something very organic. Sometimes I don't even know what's happening next, like the twists, the turns, how it's all going to come together. So for me, I don't know if I would be able to follow an outline. But yeah, so that's how I like to approach a book. It's not the greatest way to approach a book, but it works for me. Vivian, what's your process?
So I think processes always change, but one of the things, for the longest time, I thought that I was I think I'm getting feedback from somewhere. For the longest time, I thought that I was a pantser, and I made the mistake of I thought that being a plotter and using outlines was something that, great writers didn't do. So I tried to stick with it, and I tried to pants my way through a bunch of different novels, and I would only make it like maybe 5 chapters into the novel, and then I wouldn't know where it was going, and then I feel like I would have to start from the beginning, and I had other issues that I thought it was supposed to be like a perfect first draft. But it took me a while to realize that I was learning about all kinds of different outlining methods, and for some reason it never sank in that maybe I needed to use an outline. And finally one day I think it was actually with The Elysian Prophecy was the first book that I fully outlined, and it was the first book that I learned so much with this book just because I got all the way to the end. And one of the things that I like about kind of mixing outlining and pantsing, I just this last NaNoWriMo in November, I wrote a good chunk of the second book in the series, and I kind of tweaked my method a little bit. So for that one, I combined pantsing and plotting just a little bit. And for The Elysian Prophecy, I plotted my outline was like 24 pages long. I wrote so much in my outline that when I went in Scrivener and tried to pull up those scenes to write them or edit them, I had a freak out moment because I was like, I already wrote this scene. Where did it go? But it was actually written in my outline, and I hadn't actually written it. So I got a little carried away with that one. But yeah, so I'm getting to the point where I can mix it a little more, but I definitely recommend people try to plot and try to outline, because I feel like you learn a lot about what you can and can't get away with.
Absolutely. Megan, what's your process look like? Thanks, Vivian.
It's kind of a mess. But I will say, like you, Maria, I am a pantser. I've always been. Me and Justine, we get into fights about this all the time. But so basically, whenever I have a story idea, I kind of have one note in my phone where there will be character names, what they need to be doing, and eventually either like the first line of the story and probably where it's going to end. And then I just go, okay, chapter 1, I want this one thing to happen, and however it winds up getting there is how it gets there. And it's kind of fun because a lot of times my characters wind up surprising me, and I wind up learning them by not giving them a structure. That's how I find it works for me. But then I have the other problem of, as I write things, I tend to edit them extremely. So my chapter is not, here's this like freelancing wonderful journey from A to B. It's here's this A to B while I'm tearing it apart all at the same time. But I just kind of let the ideas come as they will and see what happens. I'm trying to maybe sort of blend it a little bit more because I've been having a lot of trouble writing lately, and maybe that will help. But then I tried to do outlining, and it wound up being just another kind of struggle, so I'm back to pantsing completely.
I can totally relate to that. Without a doubt. Justine, what does your process look like?
Well, I'm definitely a plotter. Vivian, I think I might actually have you shamed. I think I have like a 50-page outline for one of my stories.
Oh my God.
Basically what I do is I get an idea and I don't really write it for a while, usually about a year. And I spend that time sort of filling in little ideas here and there as I get them for the story. I sort of ruminate on it for a while I'm writing something else. And what ends up happening with that is that I've learned to, and it took a while, but I've learned to sort of outline everything, but still allow myself to pants a little bit when the time comes. So I will write out, like I will start my chapter and I know where it's going. And I even have snippets of dialogue and stuff. But getting from point A to point B, I let it go. And if it doesn't go exactly the way I want it to go, or if I end up cutting the whole piece of dialogue I already wrote, or as I'm working, then that's okay. And I just sort of allow myself that space to, you know, change everything. And then like every chapter I finish, I go back and I read the next couple of chapters and I say, okay, well, does this still fit in the outline? Have I changed anything that needs to be where I need to clean up the outline a little and make it work better? So it's sort of a blend of both. I do definitely need some sort of structure to begin with. And I also feel like I have a tendency to come up with stories and not get the character until I sit down and write. And then that often changes your plot. So if I don't really understand the character, then because you don't want to force your character into a plot situation, if it doesn't make sense for them, as I'm learning the character, a lot of times the future outline will change. So it's a blend.
Awesome. Ari.
So I used to be a pantser. I wrote my first novel last year. It's still being edited now. Because I did it via pantsing, but at the end of the day, when I got to the editing process, there was just so much to edit, and I kept thinking to myself, my friend Becky said I should plot, and plotting looks like it's a, you know, more organized thing. There was just so much to edit, so I switched to plotting. I watched a lot of Vivian's videos. I watched a lot of videos on plotting. I did a lot of research. There are a lot of articles that say, don't plot, it kills the creativity. And I'm like, wow. But I turned to plotting essentially because I asked myself this question. Do I want to do all of the work up front, or do I want to do it in the end? And will still be work at the end of the day with, you know, with anything that you write. But I found with me, if I were to just fly by the seat of my pants, that the story would just, it's like, it'll just morph. It'll just keep going and going and do its own thing. I feel with plotting, I have an understanding about my characters and the heart of the story. I ask myself questions that I normally would just have to wait until the end or halfway through to figure out. Like, I do all of my character outlining in the beginning now. Like, I feel like I know my characters so much more in this book than I did with my last book, because I did all of the outlining and the character development for them, and then I did all of the research of the world that they're in and where they fit with it. I did probably 6 months of research last year because I wanted to maintain some truth in the Japanese folklore, and you can't exactly just ask anybody about that. The outlining kind of gave me some sanity. It gives me a little control, but I leave it flexible. I have my giant outline, which is very long. I wouldn't say it's 50 pages. I usually
crazy. It's not advisable at all.
I treat it like I do with notes for school, because I'm still in school. I put like key notes that I would understand what I mean by that, or I would like abbreviate or shorten so that it's not as long if something needs to, if I feel I might forget a specific detail, for example, I feature a lot of yokai in my book, and there are yokai is just a general term. There are thousands and thousands of these things. So I actually have like notes about what each one is and where they would technically be and all that kind of stuff. I plot because I like it. I do like a flexible plot though. If I feel like a bullet point on my outline is no longer flexible enough for my character, if my character wants a little bit more room, then of course I give them room. But I'm totally a plotter. I've moved to the dark side.
If I can point, I want to make it clear that just because you plot everything in advance does not mean you will not need to revise tons and tons. I mean, I know you know that. I know you know that. But I just want to say that straight out, because I find that a lot of people think that if they plot everything out, well, now they've got the story down, and so when they dive back in and they start working on it, well, this should be fine. And so I'm done. And what often ends up happening is you end up going back in and you can miss in your outline plot points. And that's why I always say that you should always look to somebody else to read through your stories. Definitely get another ear who knows nothing about what the story is supposed to say. Because those things will get lost. Those little bits that your outline didn't catch, you will not see. And then when the time comes and you're querying your book and people are like, wait, that part doesn't make any sense, it'll hit you harder. So definitely always get someone to read it after you're done, when you're calm with it and you're happy with it, and then have them go through it and find the little bits that maybe you would not have caught.
Yeah. I want to say that that's just my personal thing. Like, I find that if I don't at least have a bare minimum plot in the beginning, my story will become something else, left wing, off topic. It'll just keep doing its thing. So for me, it minimizes the messiness for me. But
I agree. I was just saying that, you know, it's not a solution.
No, but they shouldn't think that it'll work for them. If it works differently for everybody, but yeah, it shouldn't be a substitute for trying to get out of what's going to inevitably happen regardless.
Yeah, and you should always make sure that when you're working on an outlining style, like we've all been talking, and all of ours have evolved and changed, and that's an important thing, because these things, they work differently for every kind of creative person, and you can't sort of fit yourself into a box. You can learn all the different methods and hopefully grow into one that works for you, but it's always going to be some kind of a mix of A, B, C, and D that you find most comfortable.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So that was some great dialogue on the plotting versus the pantsing. We do have 2 questions on here that I kind of feel like can go together. So it's what makes an inviting first line, and details that should be in an opening chapter. Okay, so I'm in a very not a unique situation, but a different situation. So pretty much every single manuscript that I have ever wrote was historical fiction, and I just decided to move from historical fiction to speculative fiction. So the details that should be in an opening chapter, although similar, were slightly different. So I would definitely urge anybody watching to research their genre. So for me, for right now, for speculative fiction and for any fiction, the main character needs to be introduced in the opening chapter. We need a scene setting. So we need to know where the character is, the time period, if that's applicable, what the world looks like, smells like, what it feels like. We need the rules. How does society work? Do they have a religion? These fantastical people, what makes them tick? How does their government work? So in essence, it is a very easy thing to do this huge info dump in your opening chapter. So just because these details should be in the opening chapter does not mean that we get a textbook play-by-play of what the rules of the world are. So that'll move on to, there's another question in here about approaching the opening chapter. So we'll do that one next. And as far as an inviting first line, something dynamic, something that if is not the inciting incident immediately, which probably is not a very good idea, because we're then throwing the reader into this world that they have no idea the rules of the world, and all of a sudden you're just throwing them in there, which is a very easy way to get people to close the book and not bother with it again. So as far as an inviting first line, it has to definitely suck the reader in. They need an idea of where the book is going immediately. And then you pepper your details into that opening chapter. Vivian, what do you think?
I definitely agree with the peppering. And I think one of the things that, because everyone's so concerned with the first chapter, and everybody should be concerned with the first chapter, it is a big deal. First couple lines, they're really things that you want to nail, and you want to make sure that you're hooking your reader. Everybody has heard about hooking your reader. And one of the things that I think is important is not getting too concerned with getting it right the first time. So I do like to outline, and I use outlines and I stick to it primarily. But one of the things I allow myself to do is I give myself that sort of freedom to chase sort of, not a plot bunny, but just to see where the story goes. But the editing process is where you figure out what needs to be in that first chapter. So basically, don't worry about getting it right on the very first time, because especially once you get to the end of the book, once you finish writing your manuscript, you will realize that there's maybe some stuff in that you should have included in the beginning that you didn't originally include. So it's kind of like a learning, don't get too concerned with getting it right on, like, right at the beginning. And like the peppering comment, like, you can, usually it needs to be pared down, because a lot of people do info dump into the first chapter. So that's when the editing process, you can take pieces out that don't really need to be in the first chapter, so you can get the overall setting and kind of vibe for that channel, or for that chapter. And that's one of the things with my book, The Elysian Prophecy. It had a contemporary feel to the first chapter, but it's a fantasy. So it's an urban fantasy. So for mine, that's kind of okay. But that is one thing that, like, in the first chapter, you need to establish that sort of what genre it's in. So like you said, doing research and trying to figure out, like a thriller is not going to start the same way that a fantasy book would. So I think that's really important.
Awesome. Megan, how do you approach it?
I really enjoy, there's some feedback. I really enjoy weird opening lines. I also like to read and write really weird stuff. So that's just kind of my personal preference. But like you said, is a first line should be engaging in some way. It should not necessarily tip towards action, but it should tip towards something that a reader should be interested in, or tip towards something that is kind of coming. I really like in first chapters, or just in establishing a world altogether, when you don't necessarily have straightforward lines about the world, but rather it's an opinion from a character, or like a certain scent or a certain sight that kind of explains to you the world, but it's not as straightforward. It's like you have to think about it, and it layers, and it makes something a bit more picturesque, as opposed to just being like, the government hated this because of X, or so forth. I have this, like, I do like fantasy, but I definitely like fantasy that uses the senses or thoughts to build a world. In terms of what goes in a first chapter, definitely main character, obviously. Definitely some kind of setting. You can always fill the rest of the stuff in later. And like Vivian said, you can always edit that. I mean, you're going to, no matter what. So it's okay if it's not the best world yet, but it's going to get there. And you definitely need some kind of motivation, which I think is important, because we have to know why you should care about why you should care about this character, why you should care about anything that's going on. So, like, similar to the world building thing, you don't need their entire plot laid out. You don't need the whole, oh, here's the villain. No, you just need, like, they want this because of whatever. So I think of each chapter, especially in the beginning, as like building blocks to where we need to go. And that's kind of how I approach it. So when I do my own stories, I really like to have, like, I want this to happen in chapter 1 and this to happen in chapter 2, because by chapter 15 or whatever, we should know what someone wants at this point. So it's kind of like, I think there's stepping stones of each to get from one point to the other.
That's awesome. Justine?
Okay, I have 2 points that weren't already addressed because you guys all kind of took my answers. I'm a little kid in school. You stole my answer. So first of all, we need to care about your character. And I think that's really the most important thing. People come to stories for plots, but they stay for character. So you want to make your reader love or hate or in some way want to follow this person and find out what they're going to do. And so in that way, that motivation statement that Megan made is so important, because we need to sort of get an idea, not necessarily spelled out, but get an idea of what means the most to them and why they're going to go on whatever adventure journey they're about to go on. So that is a very important aspect. Another thing is you want to start as close to your action as you can get, but you don't want to throw your reader into the middle of Crazy Town. So, for instance, speaking from my personal experience, I wrote a young adult fantasy. It's an urban fantasy, so it's easier to jump into the world because you're in our world. So there's not as much of, there's world building, but that can come later, just because of the fact that you're initially in a familiar place. And when I started it, I started with the big creature monster attack. And I thought, well, I'm starting close to the action. And what ended up happening was I started so close to the action that nobody knew why we should give a crap. And that was the general feedback I got was, okay, so yeah, that's cool, but I feel like I started on chapter 2. Who is this girl? And why do we care? And so quickly I learned the lesson that I needed a chapter before that to sort of get us to understand her and her motivations before she was thrown into the muck. So that's just a couple of other things to add on to the already great points that we've heard so far.
Awesome. Actually, that was a really good story. I think people are going to get a lot out of that, because I do feel that, there's so much information out there and so many blog posts and, the inciting incident, and you have to start with a bang. And I think we just need to take a step back and rein it in a little bit and approach it as a reader and look at our favorite books and be like, well, did Claire Fraser jump straight through the freaking stone circle in Outlander? No, she didn't. There was there were 30 pages, 50 pages before that happened. So, really look to what we love to read and see how they did it. I think that was a really good point. Ari.
You really want me to go? It was really good. So I agree with everything that was said. I don't really know what to say after all that. I sometimes end up writing multiple beginnings. I don't know why. It's playing with it to see what feels right for my character. I think, Maria, you've seen 4 or 5 different versions before I settled. I get obsessed, and that is a flaw of mine with writing. I get obsessed. I can't move forward until it feels right, at least the first line. But I feel like it depends on, like everyone else said, the kind of story that you have to tell and the kind of character that you have. If you have a character that's more outgoing, it's not going to begin so only staring out of a window, which, you know, you have to consider what the reader wants when you're writing and how you're going to portray your world and your character to that reader in a way that will make them want to know more and to keep reading. And I feel like with the opening chapter, you at least need to establish who your character is, where they live, something that they want that contributes to their larger desires or motivation in the world. That at least gives something to the reader to keep moving forward with. Personally, I try really hard not to stick everything in the first chapter. I usually make a little note on my outline that at least this should happen in this chapter so that people know about it, because it feels awkward when you add it later on. But everyone's different. Different books call for different first chapters, at least in my experience.
That's awesome. And actually, I think we've pretty much addressed the question that I was leaving, which is, how do you approach the opening chapter? One thing I will say about the approach, something that I have tried this time around, I think, Vivian, you said it first, where it was okay just not to, it's okay not to worry about it, like just get it down on paper. But I definitely, once I have my first chapter down, I legitimately forget about it until I am ready for critique partners. And then I will go back and I will rewrite it, and then I'll rewrite it again, and then I'll rewrite it a third time and a fourth time. So it's definitely, it's one of those things I almost leave to last. I just get it down on paper so that I have an idea of where the world, you know, what the world looks like, and where, you know, where my character is going. And then I like forget about it when I'm revising, editing, until I'm ready for critique partners, and then I really go hard at it. Anyone else have an approach to like an opening chapter, how we do it?
I think really what I try to do is nail down what, and this is where the outlining process gets crazy for me, and so extensive, is that I want to make sure that I know just 100% where this is going, so I can start making parallels or leading, you know, basically having the ability for that character to sort of live up to that future. And show that in not they should grow. So you shouldn't just show that, oh yeah, this person's going to become this great leader one day, but there should be some kind of spark where you can see where the evolution of the character may go. Because I feel like that, in a lot of ways, that's what draws the interest. You say, oh, this girl, she's tough. She could become something. And so when I decide where the arc is headed, I try to either put the character in a completely opposite situation, or show that, okay, we're here now, but this person has potential, in some way, either via peppering through the story, or through the chapter, or having them encounter something and seeing how they react. Usually their thoughts are a good key to showing where their emotional journey will go. So that's generally how I approach it. I make sure that I know where that character is going and then grow from there. Oh, awesome. Punchy first sentence. I forgot to say that. Get the attention.
Awesome. So we do have a question from Twitter. All right. So how do you capture an audience within the first 3 to 5 chapters? And what if the book starts slow? So this is from Morgan Brown at Writerly Writes, and she sent that in on February 18th. What if the book starts slow? My answer, find where the book starts picking up and chop everything before it. It's gone, basically. So, you know, I'm sure you've done your world building in those first couple of chapters, but that's where the peppering comes in. So see if you can rework it and get everything into one chapter to introduce, and then we start off, you know, as close to the inciting incident as possible. But yeah, if a book, you know, if it starts slow, I'm putting it back, I'm putting it down. And, you know, this is true even if you're self-publishing or e-publishing, not just if, you know, you're trying to catch like an agent's attention. it has to start near the inciting incident, because the same thing applies. People are not going to keep reading. And if they don't want to keep reading, they're going to leave bad reviews on Goodreads. So, you know, basically you want to make sure, like, half of the marketing for readership is word of mouth, and shout outs and, you know, all that good stuff. So that's really what you need to do. So if your book starts slow, just chop it, chop it, throw it away. Kill the darlings. Kill the darlings. Vivian, what do you think?
I definitely agree with that. If you were, I think if that's a question you're asking, then like you said, the story, it probably doesn't start where it needs to start. And that's one of those, like, the kill your darling situations where you might have written some great chapters or some great scenes at the very beginning, and it's hard to just erase those things. Sometimes you can kind of salvage those and put them throughout the book, so they don't need to happen in the beginning. So that's a good, you know, you can recycle some of the material that you have in the beginning. If it's starting slow, maybe that's a good opportunity, those little slow pieces, to put it after the inciting incident, where readers kind of might need a little bit of a break after some really heavy action scenes. And then the other part of that question, capturing an audience within the first 3 to 5 chapters. This is where, for outlining, is great, because you can get more of an idea. Once you outline the entire book, you can get more of an idea of what needs to happen in those first 3 to 5 chapters, and what would make your book, say if it's a thriller, what would make, like, for a thrilling beginning. But so those first 3 to 5 chapters, they have to set the tone of what kind of genre that you're writing in. And you have to make the reader care about whatever character that you're writing about, whatever situation that they may be in. And it's like a balance. So you have to have the action of the inciting incident close enough that it captures the reader's attention. And then you have to give them the reason why. Like, why is the character doing this? Like, what's the character's motivation? And then if that kind of doesn't happen in the first, like you said, if that doesn't happen, cut everything up until you get to that piece of where it stops being so slow. And then if you're a pantser and you don't, you know, you're first starting out and you're just writing the first 3 to 5 chapters, that's something you can hash it out, get it written down, and then once you get to the end, then you can see what needs to be included, and then what can just be taken out, what you can just delete.
Awesome. Megan, any words of wisdom?
So you definitely don't want the beginning of your story to be slow. I definitely agree with chopping the beginning. If you feel like you're taking even 2-3 chapters and you're just not getting anywhere, it might be best to cut it. Like Vivian said, it might also be a good idea to take some of those details and sprinkle them somewhere else. That may be where they're needed. My advice for a slow beginning is you need to ask yourself what each chapter is doing. So if you have chapter 1 and say your character is just like hanging around a store or market or wherever you are, you have to ask what that chapter is doing. So if it's just like, oh, I want to introduce the world or whatever, like, that's cool. But what are you doing in that chapter to do that? If you find that it's not really working, or you just find you kind of just are playing around, then maybe that's not where you should start. So when I tend to write anything, I try to think about my story in terms of that. And if I feel like one chapter is kind of lingering, or I'm just writing it because I feel like I should be writing it, I go, okay, maybe this isn't the chapter to start with, or this isn't the chapter that needs to be here. So that's kind of how I approach it. And I think if you start asking why you're adding something or why your character is doing something, and think of it more as like what I was saying earlier, the stepping stones that you need to get to where you need to be, then that'll make it easier for you to decide what you need to do in your beginning chapters.
Awesome. Justine, anything?
Yes, it's okay for the reader to be confused for a minute. Not to not care, but if you can throw them in a little bit in the middle of something. It doesn't have to, not to the point where it's confusing and people are overwhelmed, but you can unravel details with time. And so what ends up happening is if you chop off that whole first half that you did, that was not first half, but first couple of chapters that were a little bit too, a little too slow, and you start from there and start from that third chapter, and the character is now doing the thing, the important thing, right? Then you've started in the right place, and everything else, even if some details are a little bit confusing and throw the reader off a little bit, can then unravel throughout, as long as you have created a character that you can care about and that will hold the interest of the reader. Then it's okay to not know everything. You should have an idea of why the reader's upset, or why the main character's upset, or why the main character's in this situation, or what the main character needs to do. But you don't have to know all of the surrounding details before you jump into the story. And I think that's like a pitfall that a lot of writers fall into, where they're trying to create the world and then put their character into it and show us a day in the life of this character prior to this bad thing happening or this life-changing event. But that's not necessary. We can learn about a normal day in the life through the changes that the character is experiencing and how they react. Another thing, and this is going off of what Vivian said and what Megan said, when you take that chunk off the top, you should always have a document that is dump doc. And toss anything you cut that you liked, but you killed a darling and you enjoyed it. Throw it in. Not enjoyed killing the darling. Enjoyed it. That sounded kind of.
I mean, there is some enjoyment there, depending.
Option in fixing something, but if you killed a darling and you had enjoyed that part of the novel and you're gonna miss it, or you think you can use it somewhere, toss it in the dump doc. You can always put it back in. You usually will never want to, though, once you get it. And I mean, you might want to put in parts, but you won't want to return that piece where it goes, because what you'll see that your read goes smoother. And so, yeah, always keep it though, because it's close to your heart. You created it. There's no reason to dump it in the garbage, but don't keep it in your story.
That's awesome. And actually, piggybacking off of that, you said something that got my brain fired up. So, like, I feel a lot of the time with the info dumping, which is probably what's happening if your story is not moving by the time we get to chapter 3 or 5. With the info dumping, it's not just the world building, I find sometimes. It's like this emotional info dump about the main character and why they are the way that they are, and kind of we're almost like establishing where the character's emotional state is going to land by the end of the book, by talking about all the bullying that happened in high school, and maybe bad parental relationships and things like that, and over establishing that person's inner thoughts and inner workings. That's information that we should learn throughout the arc of the entire novel, so that we can learn that as we go. So just something else to think about, Ari.
Yes. You just put something in my head as well. I find that when people focus too much on putting all that up front with the info dumping, they go into way too much showing or telling. It depends on the people. Some people just dump both. I think we have to come back to remembering how we as human beings react. When we're looking at someone, how do we know they're upset? Their facial expressions, how they're behaving throughout the day, how they're interacting, how their voices sound, how they're coping with stress versus how they would normally cope with stress. The nonverbal component is so important, and you don't need an info dump. If you say something to someone they don't like, their eyebrows will probably twitch, something will go on with their face. You can be subtle with a little bit of detail and still express, you know, a person's mental state, or, you know, a single line of dialogue sometimes can even do that. So it's very important to remember that sometimes a little bit goes a long way in describing where your character is at mentally, how they're reacting to things. And I think that's important for all writers, you know, to remember. I sometimes put, you know, too much detail myself, but it's easy to do, I think, because we want to explain it, and we're afraid that people aren't going to get it if we just put a single line. But it's trusting that human beings are reading the book and will understand that when someone behaves a certain way, they're jealous, or if someone does something that they're probably angry or upset, or little hints about a person's relationship with another individual, and you know the telltale signs of tension, which adds to the conflict. So it's just remembering that a little bit goes a long way when adding information, and that can be scattered throughout the book. And how the character's reaction changes to those can be indications of, you know, changing an arc. So a little bit, long way. So that's pretty much what I was thinking about when you were saying that.
I think one of the more important things is and in every aspect of writing is finding the balance.
Yes.
And I feel like what especially newer writers, and I think that when we've been through the trenches a few times, it becomes like beaten into us. But always remember that you're going to have to go back, and you're going to have to rewrite. And that balance, you'll figure out that balance through the rewrites. You're never going to get it right the first time. It doesn't mark failing in you as a writer, because it's impossible to strike the right tone right off the bat. As you draw the story out, then when you go back and read it, you're going to find your balance. And sometimes it'll take a few times, but those things, you know, it's never only, oh, don't only include this and don't include that. It's always like they always say, show, don't tell. It's always show some things, tell other things. And so you have to find that scale, that balance that helps you find the story in the right way. But yeah, always be prepared to jump back in if you feel like something is out of balance, and just sort of remeasure.
I wanted to piggyback really quick off of something that Ari and Justine said earlier. A lot of the explanation that you give, the show, don't tell, descriptions, world building, a lot of that stuff, when you're just starting out, you can feel like it needs to be black and white. You need to state exactly what it's like, exactly what that character's feeling, exactly what their emotions are. And I think that writers shouldn't be afraid of the gray area. You kind of want to live in that gray area of that balance where you give some information, but you don't completely spell it out, because your readers want to feel smart, and your readers are smart. So if they kind of connect some things on their own, that's a great thing, because it kind of gets them involved in the story. And since you're not totally spelling everything out, they can figure things out on their own and bridge things together. And it sort of gets them involved in the story too.
I want to say something real quick. I know we're all piggybacking, but I'm going to do it too. There's been a lot of debate, I think, in the writing community about this show versus tell rule, especially lately. And I do freelance editing, so there are definitely times where I will read something in a manuscript and highlight it and be like, this would work way better to just tell it. Or this will work way better if you get rid of this one sentence and actually make it a paragraph, because it will make the character stronger, or it'll make this relationship stronger. And it's always this thing where every person in their story will encounter a different point where one will work better than the other. Maybe you need a little bit of both. Maybe you don't need any of it. It's just, there's a balance that you have to find with yourself, with your work. Sometimes your story will require more showing, and I think that's really good when you're trying to learn about a character or a relationship or something. And then there are other times when telling works. Like if something big just happened and you wrote it, you don't need to have the character then kind of like mentally relive it as they're telling the person. Like it's just something you can easily transition to with just telling. And it's, you know, I know for new writers it's kind of like that's the rule you always have been told. Like I remember even as a kid that was the thing you were told, and it's not as applicable anymore. And I think writing also always is changing, as well. And I think as you write, you also need to adapt to it, and you will the more you do it.
That was well said.
That was very well said. Absolutely. Without a doubt, that was well said. And you know, it's I encountered something recently in the last couple of months. I was asked to look at something, and there was an interesting moment where the writer showed in the dialogue, and it like completely threw me for a loop. So I do think that's definitely a debate that we need to like pick this up for the showing versus telling on another live cast. No joke, it was you know beautiful expository language, but in dialogue, I'm like, people don't talk like that. Don't be showing that. You can just tell your girlfriend, you know, that the guy was hot. You don't have to talk about his rippling abs and, you know, the glisten of tan off his brow as the sun hit the. I was like, yo, you know, we need to like discuss show versus tell and what it really means. So I think that might be the topic of our next one, because I think it's a huge debate right now. Huge. But outside of that, I don't have any other questions from Twitter. Ari, is there anything on the live feed?
I just remembered that you mentioned something about tropes, but I don't know if that's for this episode or next episode. I can't remember.
All right, we might hit it up for the next episode, because I'd say everyone's probably got toothpicks on their eyelids right now. I remember the last time I was on YouTube for an hour. It's so funny.
I think
this has been awesome, you guys. I've
An
really
hour
enjoyed
flew by.
Yeah, it did. It did, and I really, really enjoyed it. Ari, do you want to talk about the giveaway?
Yes. So I don't know if you guys know, but I've been telling Twitter for a while now that I'm going to be giving away. I'm always pronouncing it wrong. Scrivener, I think it is. This month, next month, and April. And so this month, I randomly picked a person to win the giveaway, and that person is Noelle Lord.
Woohoo!
on Twitter. But I decided to do this because I think sometimes whether you're a plotter or a pantser, it's good just to try it out and just see what's out there. And if anything, you'll at least have a place to organize a little bit, or just put some stuff in, or have like a character corkboard, which I'm loving right now. I love the corkboard. It's in my play area. But I decided to do this, like I said, because I think it's important just to kind of branch out and just see if anything else works for you, or combine it, plotting and pantsing together. I feel like there should be a term for that. Is there a term for that? Plotting and pantsing?
How about we coin one?
Yeah, Planter, yeah, it is.
One right now.
But so this month it's going to Noelle Lord, and every month, you know, as people come through, anyone who subscribed at any point will be considered. But it's just something I wanted to give to the writing community to say, you've got this, you can do this, regardless of how you do it, and just to kind of keep people moving forward and thinking about the future of their writing. It can be so hard to think about, you know, whether or not you're going to be writing in the future. You know, it's always focus on now and trying to work on this project, but remember that there's a future for you as a writer. You just gotta work hard, follow, you know, get in there and get it done. So yeah, I'm gonna be giving away Scrivener, and Noelle Lord is this month. So yay!
Yay! Awesome. And I want to take a second to thank Vivian, Megan, and Justine for joining us. Maybe you guys would like to join us again in the future when we talk about other amazing writing things.
Sign me up.
This has really been awesome, and I have never seen anything like this out there before. It's always, you know, opinion pieces and things like that, but to get so many different people that have, you know, written multiple things together to discuss, you know, where we were versus where we are now versus, you know, where we want to be, which, yay. You know, it was fantastic. And I want to also thank everyone for tuning in. And if you enjoyed it, tell all of your writerly friends. And of course, this will be archived on our channel, I assume, Technical Queen over there. It'll be awesome. Since I couldn't even get my webcam working today, so whatever. And definitely spread the word. Everyone subscribe, and we'll be doing this at least once a month. So thank you, guys.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah,
Thank
thank you
you.
for having
It was
me.
so much fun.
And it's for all of you. Awesome. Thanks, guys. Oh, and Vivian, real quick, why don't you plug your book one more time before we go?
Oh, absolutely. I have a copy right here because I still find it totally amazing that I'm holding a copy of my book. The Elysian Prophecy just released 4 days ago on the 20th. So it's available paperback and ebook. Go check it out. It is a young adult dark fantasy. There is some dark stuff in there.
Megan will like it. Awesome. Thanks, guys. Until next time, this has been Craft Quest.
All right. Bye, guys.
Bye.
Bye.